Hello, this is the Archipelago map for Terra Mystica that I designed last year. It took me many hours to design, and then we had many hours, hundreds of hours of playtesting from the community, and I think it's pretty great. And I'm going to just use this video to talk you through a bit of overview of the map, what the kind of point of it was and how it plays, and then to give some tips on where you might want to start and what you might want to think about depending on what faction you're playing. So the purpose of the map was to provide territorial challenge for expert players. So one of the favourite things that I like about Terra Mystica, especially as I get better and better and more experience at the game, is that jostling for position and sort of thinking about the territory, just staring at the map and wondering how you're going to get to the places you need to get to. So I wanted a map that really kind of maximised that. And so that looks like just constant hex competition throughout the whole game. So that's what I was aiming for with this map. I also had some quite ambitious balance goals that I'll talk through a bit later. But the main goal was that territorial challenge. So how did I figure that? How did I go about that? Well, I started by thinking about trying to get people to place their hexes, place their initial dwellings in a kind of similar area so that it's all quite claustrophobic. You'll notice here that we've got these two big land masses on the west, and then we've got these smaller islands on the east. And those smaller islands are basically too small to accommodate kind of neighbours, sort of people getting the real benefits that you want to get in Terra Mystica from having neighbours, leeching and all that. So generally, where people will start, when looking for that leech party to start, everyone is going in the west to get those neighbours. But you can't really, most factions, most game plans can't stay on those mainland on the west. They need a route out to the island, so you need some kind of access to these islands as well. And once you try to factor both those in to your initial placement, then you're probably starting to worry about connection. So you've got these three considerations for placement, and you've got the jostling for position in the beginning, as you're all placing very close to each other, and trying to make sure that your connection route isn't compromised, and also making sure, and then towards the end of the game, you're trying to complete that connection, but you're also trying to kind of move out east and get the best places on the islands. So that's kind of how it plays. Yeah, this is kind of where the most popular starting placements are, all quite concentrated in this one area. I'll compare that to kind of base map where it looks a lot more spread out. So let's just talk through, just to give you an idea of how it plays, let's talk through one example. So I picked Mend, which used to be a very popular setup. So it's mermaids, engineers, darklings, nomads. I put them in that order. So I've imagined my mermaids going first, and they're going to go G4. That's a nice spot for them, nice and central. They can get out from there, but they can also go west E1. Then we've got engineers going next and go H5, again, like really nice route through H6 onto the islands, but should get some neighbours in the middle. Darklings have gone up in C4, decent location for them, next to B3 and C5. And then nomads have gone G5 because lovely neighbours, lovely leech, and obviously the H4, I5 kind of path that looks nice to them. They've also gone D4, and you'll often see nomads go D4 just to help them, aid them with connection, because connection, as you'll see, is going to get super hard for them. So then Darkling's going F3 to join this leech party. They're connected, lovely, they've got route to the islands, lovely, they're looking happy. Engineers have a choice between F2 and D1, I think, and I've imagined them being a little bit ambitious going for D1. It's going to make connection a bit harder, but it means that they will actually be able to get to D1 and F1 and G1 and have a bit more going on in the west. So they're going D1. Then we've got mermaids going C5. Their game plan looks pretty solid now. They're pretty happy. And then nomads, that's the interesting one. They've gone C3. I think, this is going to make, as we'll see, it's going to make the connection super hard. But I think it's a decent choice just because they want those neighbours. They want to get involved in that leech party. and there's no other particularly great options for them. They're going to go C3, and then they're either going to have a tough time connecting, or maybe they won't bother connecting, and yeah, then they're going to have a pretty decent game on this map without. So first move, first turn, mermaids are going to make sure they secure E2 before engineers try and take it. Engineers are then have to take D2. They need D2, or they're in a lot of trouble. If they don't take D2, they need to get to E3 at some point if they're going to connect. And yeah, this is quite a crucial hex for them. So they're going to take that as soon as they can. Darklings are now slightly worried about a town in the north. They're going to take B3 to make sure they can secure that town. And yeah, there we are. Nomads are suddenly, they look like pretty reasonable moves to start with. Now suddenly they're in a lot of trouble. If they want to connect, they're going to have to take C2. They're going to have to take probably F2 in order to connect their 3 starting dwellings. They've only got 1 space to start with, and they're going to take that H4, which engineers have happily left them because they were busy worrying about D2. So at least they managed to get that. And now, yeah, if they do want to connect, they're going to probably have to get their stronghold in round 1 and take one of F2 and C2, then hopefully get the other one the next time. And that way they might well connect. But of course, both those hexes are under quite a lot of threat. Engineers want F2 almost as much as they want E3, well, not quite as much as they want E3, but they'll certainly take F2 if they can. Mermaids want C2. Once they've taken E1, they want C2 to start to help with the town in the west. So yeah, it's looking tricky for Nomads. Also looking really tricky for engineers because they need to get E3, which is kind of under threat from the Nomads. They also need H6. That's crucial for them. And that is something the Darklings could potentially take from them, because otherwise the Darklings won't get a town down in the south. So that's so there's a lot of competition there immediately. One interesting thing to notice is that the colour neighbours, mermaids and darklings, are hardly fighting at all. But all the other factions seem to be. In particular, engineers don't have any colour neighbours in their setup, this matchup, but they are already in a major territory battle with all the other factions. So that's really interesting. I think that seems to happen more on this map than on others. So I'm going to finish off by taking you through some starting placement recommendations for each faction and talk through the balance kind of goals I had for each colour at the same time. So which is now it's an interesting place to start. I think that C6 is a really good place for them to start. It gives them a nice town option up through to A4. And get some out of the island. That pairs well with G3, which has a nice kind of 2 hexes for 1 spade situation. To connect, they'll need E2 or C5, and if mermaids are in the game and mermaids go G4 and C5, then it's very likely they'll then make connection quite hard for witches, and they might have to go via F2, which might be tricky depending on who else is in the game. So yeah, it's a little bit of a worry. One thing you can do to prevent that is maybe actually just build on E2 and start on E2 instead of G3. But you might find that just going C6 will stop mermaids from going C5 anyway. So you might be okay. But as an option of just starting on E2, hoping to get G3, and later in the game, or if not, then you can maybe go up, get a town up in the northwest. In terms of the balance goals here, so I wanted to equalise Allen and Witches as far as possible. I think it's pretty big challenge, pretty big ask to try and equalise them entirely. Allen have just got not much going on in their favour, but I figured the best way to get close was to provide an easy early town, because that's something that Allen really liked, to get going on the Colts, but then make it hard to then get another 2 towns to get up to the 3 towns that Witches really want to make the most of their ability. And I think both of those are looking pretty good. So I think I've got pretty close to this, and stats suggest that they're pretty close together. So we'll see if that bears out. But that's pretty cool. All right, great. So dwarves and engineers, I think both want to start H5 and D1. For dwarves, then they get some nice tunneling action to some nice spots that are a bit further out of the kind of main bit. So down to H2G1 and up to B2, they've got a nice town spot up there. They also want to be able to go up to G7, maybe an I8 ideally. There are a bit of risk on both H4 and H6 of those getting taken by other factions like yellow or blue. But they generally have other options. If those do get taken, they can connect via kind of F2 and E2 or F2 and D2, whatever. So, oh yeah, the other thing that, I mean, they might not get H2 because green might get it, but again, they can connect out. They have other connection options, so they're looking pretty good from H5 and D1. Engineers same H5 and D1, but yeah, they're going to really want to make sure they get down to E3, ideally F2 early, and they also need to make sure that they're going to get H6 and be able to get out from the islands that way. Then they're connected via E3 to H6. If that looks too scary, then you can go maybe H5 and F2, and that makes it a bit easier to connect. Maybe you may even be able to double dig through G5 in some games. But I think H5 and D1, if it looks like it might work, is going to be the best. One thing to note on this is it might be a bit scary if you've got, say you've got mermaids on an earlier seat than you, so they're placing their second dwelling after you, and you think, oh, if I go H5, will they go G6 and go and take H6 first action? They probably won't, is my advice. So I think risk it for a biscuit is what I would say there. And even if they do, I think you can still have a good game. I back you. I back you to make the most of it, either with an orphan dwelling or by getting out via G5 or H4 and G4. Goal here was to equalise dwarves and engineers, or even make dwarves slightly better. I think dwarves maybe are probably a bit better than engineers in the latest situation of this map. Switching H5 and H6 made a massive difference towards the end of testing, so we'll have to see if that bears up, but it looks like it's made engineers slightly worse and dwarves slightly better. And the key the key reasons for that are that we've managed to get these good town and tunneling spots that are kind of hard to get to for engineers but easy to get to for dwarves. Okay, in terms of red factions, Chaos Magicians are nearly always going to go D2, and then they're going to have to try and get themselves to E4 as soon as possible. They're going to want build a town between kind of D2 and E3 and D1 or C3 or F2. That they're going to get a town with a sanctuary there, and you want to get to E4 as soon as possible and just do your best to get there. It's definitely a risk that one of those gets taken. E3 getting taken by grey would be pretty painful, but there's other things you can do. You can sort of start getting to like C6, for instance, or E4 might get taken by a yellow nomads, in which case you're just going to have to go to G7 or B6. There are plans B and C, but really you want to get to E4 if you can, then you're going to have a good game, and you should have got lots of leech on D2. There are some other options for starting placements like B4 and H4. I think it's very rare that they can be better. Giants, they're going to want to start on D2 and D4, I would say, and then they, by all means, try and get A3 and B4 if they look possible. But actually, you can have a good game just by getting all of the coastal reds. There's 8 coastal reds here, and if you can ship to them, you get to E3 early, and then prioritize getting up to D5, and then getting the rest. And with a couple of bridges, you should be able to easily get 3 towns. So I was trying here to make the Giants, for the red faction, trying to make the Giants an okay faction without making the Chaos Magicians OP. And so I've tried to make sure that these red hexes are accessible and not contested by other factions from a location that Giants might start, but Chaos Magicians won't. So I've achieved that, but whether it will be enough, I don't know yet. We haven't got enough data on these factions to be sure. It looks like Chaos Magicians are pretty good on this map. Giants, we just don't have enough data. Okay, yellow. We saw those three starting spots for nodes. I think think they'll nearly always be the ones you go for. And yeah, it's tempting to go to push down and expand to I5 straight away. But actually, if you have the chance to get to D2, um, or just get out onto the river from C3 early, then that's possibly a priority if you want to connect. On the other hand, as I said, there's plenty of options for good nomads game plans that don't end up connecting because they've just got such nice, strong starting places. They'll get lots of leech, and they can have a lot of fun. For Keys, we'll start like best starting place. I think of them the C3 and G5. They can do their nice carpet flights, or even probably not a carpet flight in the south. Ideally, they'll take H4. They can get that early town, increase their range, and then start hopping over to all these yellow hexes that are kind of 3 away from each other. The goal here, similar again, I wanted to make for Keys good without making nomads OP, and do that by having these nice carpet flight spots and one nice town spot for Fakirs to increase their range, but to make it hard for the nomads to connect via shipping. So I think I'm pretty sure I've succeeded in making Fakirs a good faction on this map. They generally perform well. I'm kind of scared to see how they look with the landscape. Nomads do need a bit more testing. They were a little bit OP in the last iteration. I've tweaked a couple of things to try and bring them down a peg or two, but we'll see if I succeeded. Cool. Brown cultist. This is one of the more controversial ones, I think, in terms of their kind of options on this map. I think it's potentially really interesting, and I'd like to see how it develops. They've got they can often have a tough time. I think I4 is a pretty good starting spot for them. It's one of the few where they're likely to get both expansion options and neighbours, and especially if Grey's in the game, starting on H5, then that's just lovely for them. And other colours can be good too. Obviously not if yellow's in the game and is liable to start on I5, which is a definite risk. Then I4 stops being any good. But in other situations, I think I4 is a pretty good place to start. Sometimes it can get weirdly not get neighbours, but usually it does. I think D3 pairs well with that. D3 is there mainly just for connection here. The downside is that there's a good chance that it won't have any neighbours, which is obviously doubly bad for cultists, given their ability. But what can be good, what I have seen go really well on D3 is if you compare it with temp ship and get a spade and get up to B6 and A6 in round 1. That's pretty nice, or just early in the game. So that is an option for cultists. One hex I haven't mentioned yet is B3. B3 is really interesting because it's nice and central. It looks good. It's surrounded by loads of black and yellow hexes, but it just gets cut off so early from C4, either by black or blue, and you can forget about getting to D2. That's just not going to happen. So I think that means you've kind of got two options if you're going to go B3. You either resort to hacking across up the north through B4, A5, A6, which is possible, or you have to play the liberated game of deciding, actually, do you know what? I'm not even going to bother connecting. I'm just going to have fun. I'm going to build a tool. I'm going to win those cults and have a sort of liberating experience that way. If you do go B3, B3. D3 is one option if you do think you do have a chance of connecting. B3, I4, not impossible to connect, but probably best off choosing that if you're not going to even really try and connect that hard. I suppose there's another option where you go B3, G2 and advance with digging and get a lot of the hexes in the west and end up maybe connecting via C2. So a few options there for cultists, but all of them quite tricky. Compared to that, halflings relatively straightforward. I think. I mean, they can use a lot of those other hexes that we talked about for cultists, but I think best options for them are I4 and E6. Both good options for getting the worker engine going early via these kind of 2 hex for 1 spade opportunities. The balance goal here, well, I wanted to nerf cultists without hurting halflings too much. So I wanted to, so that's why I gave them these nice expansion routes on I4 and E6 that had other issues, like not having any neighbours. So yeah, that enables halflings to get their work economy early, but kind of stops cultists from using their power quite so much. So I think that's gone pretty well. Right, move on to black. Darklings, really flexible faction. I think C4 and H3 are really good starting places, especially if they can get to G4, which they may not be able to if mermaids win the game, for instance. Then they're connected. They're one of the few factions that probably doesn't need the islands so much. They can have a decent game without, but I think even they would ideally be able to expand onto the islands, and that's their best chance of doing that is via F3. But again, that might be killed by blue. They can also perfectly happily start on F3, and I suppose if blue in the game, I think I probably would recommend that F3 and C4. Alchemists will also want C4 and try and get a town up there, but they'll also want to start in the east, and they've got some lovely 2-ship options from E7, for instance. And then their challenge is connecting on F3, and again that's under threat by mermaids, as is B8 sometimes, if mermaids choose to start in the east as well, or indeed swarmlings are particularly bad for that. So if they are up against blue or otherwise worried about connecting via F3, then they could just start on F3 and B8 actually and have a decent game that way. Balance goal here, similar to brown, nerf the darklings without hurting the alchemists. And so I've tried to make them a good shipping faction for alchemists' sake. But I think success is only partial there because these sort of big mainland chunks on the west are just so good for digging faction like darklings. I think I'm not convinced that I've managed to equalise darklings and alchemists. I think we've ended up with darklings slightly above average and alchemists slightly below average, but we'll see. We'll see how the stats bear that out. Finally, blue. So mermaids, we've talked about a bit already. Yeah, G4 and C5 are both really good. They've both got that 2 hex for 1 spade options. They're both good places to get towns. They can get blocked off by witches on C6 or sometimes E2. So if those hexes aren't looking good, then G6 is a good option, but also C8 from C8. Look, you can get to A10 and G9 just with a double dick. So that's pretty nice too, with the downside that it's kind of out of the way. So I think mermaids are good. Last but not least, swarmlings. A10 is a great place to start, a nice safe town to start with. Even if black go on B8, you're in pretty good shape to still get a town up there. Then for your second placement, I think you just wherever you feel confident of getting a town on the mainland, you've got G6 is often really good, partly just because it blocks sort of other players. It takes up a lot of valuable hexes, and it gives you best connection opportunities. But only if you feel confident you'll be able to get a F3 and H6, for instance, or to get a town in general. G4 is also a good option. C5 is a good option. There's others. So that's swarmlings. Balance goal here. To be honest, what I wanted to do was disincentivize the 7 structure hordeling strategy by making it hard for them to get towns with a small number of digs, to make them work a bit harder for that kind of strategy and forcing them to kind of go shipping a bit at some point. And that seems to have worked pretty well. I've seen a lot of games where swarmlings have ended up on 14, 15 structures, sometimes even more, I think. And yeah, they've gone shipping and they've connected, and they've at least gone for a third town. So I think that's gone pretty well. That is everything that you need to know to get started on a game on Archipelago map, except for how do you actually do it. I will post some details wherever I post this video, or you can just Google Board Game Geek Terra Mystica Archipelago, and you'll find a forum thread with details on how to play this map on Board Game Arena. Thanks for listening.